Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. I am pleased to be able to present international reactions to the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. I will do so using examples from Australia. The impact of the Supply Chain Act should be seen in the context of the EGD, the European Green Deal, as important areas overlap and complement each other. The European Green Deal is a comprehensive plan, not a law, to transform the European Union economy into a sustainable, low-carbon and circular economy. It came into force on the 29th of July 2021 and aims to achieve climate neutrality for the EU by 2050. The Green Deal includes a wide range of measures. The overlaps with the Supply Chain Act mainly concern sustainable transport, increasing the share of renewable energies, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, establishing healthier food production, and promoting sustainable agriculture and forestry. The LKSG, or Supply Chain Act, obliges companies with more than 3,000 employees in Germany from 2023 and companies with more than 1,000 employees from 2024 to respect internationally recognized human rights and certain environmental standards. The Federal Office of Economics and Export Control BAFA is responsible for enforcing this new legislation. Companies must submit mandatory reports and may also be subject to risk-based audits. If the companies concerned violate the new legislation, it can have serious economic consequences. Fines of up to 8 million euros or up to 2% of annual global turnover. In order to understand potential difficulties in dealing with Australian companies, I would like to give a brief outline of the political landscape that has shaped key basic attitudes of industry and commerce. When it comes to the environment and climate protection in the past, Australia has put much more effort into marketing its image than into effective action. Back in 1997 in Kyoto, extremely hard work was done to water down the climate targets. Kyoto resulted in almost all countries having to reduce their emissions, but Australia was allowed to increase them by 8%. Similar efforts were also evident in Paris, but they were identified by the international community and counteracted accordingly. During the event in Glasgow, Australia's Prime Minister even spoke to an empty house. Domestically, however, the results were sold as a successful defence of the Australian economy and sovereignty. Australian policy is not determined in Brussels, after all. When a new Prime Minister was elected in 2007, who emphasised the importance of climate protection, the domestic climate dispute in Australia intensified, bringing with it a strong shift to the right of the political landscape and considerable polarisation. A poll in 2022 found that 24% have serious concerns about whether climate change is actually happening, and 40% have no position because there are far too many contradictory statements on the subject. As recently as 2017, then Treasurer and later Prime Minister Scott Morrison brought a lacquered lump of coal to Parliament to demonstrate the importance of coal to Australia. This has created mentality in the dominant industries that climate protection is only important for others. Quote, "We only make up 1% of the world. Why should we cut our economy by X%?" Unquote. The election 2022 brought a big turnaround. Nevertheless, 116 new projects in the fossil sector are before the current government for approval, and the real rethink has not yet begun at that level. Many suspect deep corruption. Society has moved on. More than 80% want to see more activity in the sustainable sector, as was shown in the last election. The LKSG clearly touches the economy. But how big is the pie? What are we talking about? Australia's gross national product is about $2,500 billion, with exports generating about $680 billion. 1/7 of the Australian economy is dominated by mining, whose products account for 2/3 of the export volume. Just over 1/3 of exports go to China, 1/8 to Japan, and the EU is the target of only 3.6% as of the 6th of April 2023. In the 21-22 financial year, the total trade volume with the EU was $97 billion, and Germany accounts for slightly more than a quarter of this. Australian business has shown mixed reactions to the EU's Green Deal. These include concerns about the impact on trade. Sections of Australian industry are concerned that the EU's climate policy could lead to trade barriers and affect exports to the EU. This is particularly important given that A, the EU is Australia's third largest trading partner, and B, the dependence on China is meant to be reduced. The domestic energy and resources sectors also fear a domino effect and the hated carbon tax, which has been fought by Conservatives for many years. Others see the EU Green Deal as an opportunity for cooperation and partnership, especially in areas such as renewable energy, sustainable transport, and the circular economy. Ambitious strategies and the translation into binding policies and laws usually pose new challenges for all parties involved. Companies must ensure that their entire supply chain complies with the requirements of the law in order to minimize liability risks. They need to adapt their business practices to ensure compliance with the LKSG. This includes working with suppliers and business partners to gather information about their supply chains. Implementing the LKSG may involve additional costs, such as hiring staff or implementing IT systems to monitor the supply chain. Companies may need to manage complex supply chains that span multiple countries and industries. Not to be overlooked are image and reputation risks, which can lead to loss of customers and business. Companies must work closely with their suppliers to ensure that they also comply with the requirements of the LKSG and that the supply chain can be traced. There are several ways to approach this subject. Companies must involve specially trained contact persons in order to meet the regulatory requirements of the LKSG and to introduce appropriate prevention measures. External consulting services could be helpful here. Automated background checks using artificial intelligence and machine learning can uncover human rights risks in the supply chain and agree on measures. Companies should review their code of conduct for practicality in upholding human rights due diligence and introduce it as a governance tool for human rights compliance. Regular training on human rights issues is necessary for a comprehensive understanding of human rights violations in the workforce and for risk identification and prevention. Representatives of business partners should also be involved. Here are two examples to illustrate different situations. The leading producer of alumina and aluminium as a raw material for further processing, Alcoa, has its headquarters in the USA and some aluminium mines and smelters in Australia. Due to rising energy prices and an anticipated domino effect, there are fears of an exodus of the industry. Energy costs currently account for 30 to 40% of manufacturing costs, with about 26.5 terawatt-hours consumed in 2021. There is loud whining because it was repeatedly promised that there would be no carbon tax. These complaints are supported by lobbyists who badger as many parliamentarians as they can and by the media, over 50% of which is owned by the arch-conservative News Corp and thus Rupert Murdoch. Greenwashing is alleged because of the land consumption by new mines and the glossing over of the supposedly environmentally friendly natural gas. The beef industry is quite different. It is already used to responding to special EU requirements. There is the UCAS accreditation system for cattle. For example, separate animal husbandry has been practiced for years. Meat containing hormones is not allowed on the EU market. The EU is seen as a lucrative market, but land consumption is problematic. The German LKSG poses great challenges to all parties involved. With the right approach to change management, the necessary rethinking can occur and, together with the right partners, the required processes and tools can be put in place that will ultimately lead to the desired success. Thank you.